not in service at this time.
Here we are, CUTV, Beyond the Film Festival. We are talking to two writers from A Christmas Horror Story. We have Doug and Pascal. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves more fully and your involvement on the project?
Yes, we would. First, we'd like to pass the mic back and forth. My name's Doug Taylor, screenwriter, and the portion of A Christmas Horror Story that I was responsible for was the Santa Claus and his ravenous elves story.
Pascal Trottier, and I wrote the Changeling story.
That's fantastic. We were actually just talking about those particular stories right before you guys came on. Steve says that he thinks that the zombie elves is going to be the next big subgenre to kind of break into the kind of horror mythology. He's like, Krampus is big now, zombie elves is the future.
Well, I think that's going to make a lot of diminutive actors very happy if that happens, because we've found, I think, as many of small actors as we could use and put them to good use, and then chop them up, of course.
And of course, they never work enough. It's always good to jobs.
A partridge in a pear tree.
How do you see this project as an extension of the kind of already established, really strong Canadian genre cinema?
Yeah, Doug and I are really aware of the tradition, the genre horror tradition in this country. So we grew up watching a lot of Canadian horror films, genre films, and right now I think there is a kind of there's a new generation of filmmakers coming up, and they're all really, really talented. So we feel like, well, firstly, Copperheart, they're really dedicated into developing new stories with new talent, and that's how we met through Darknet, and that's what when Steve put together Darknet, he really wanted to, bring people. He had worked with Doug before, and Doug was probably the more senior writer, right? You had worked with him before on a lot of stuff, but the rest of us were all pretty new to this. I had never worked with him before, and a few other writers had never worked with him before, and so it was really great to meet all these genre writers and directors as well, doing Darknet, and that Darknet was really how we all got together to do this movie. So I think for us, it's. I mean, you're right. I mean, I think there are a lot of genre films because probably genre films are a little cheaper to make, and people like. There's a real need. There's an audience out there for genre films. So, but to make good ones, I don't know what it is about, but there's so many good ones up here, and we just really wanted to, raise our game and really, make a small mark and do something different and unique. And that's what we want to do.
Yeah, just to add to that, on the topic of Copperheart in particular, I think that if you look back at their work, they're very focused on genre films and horror films, and with the Ginger Snap series, and then Vincenzo Natali's work. And I worked with Vincenzo on Splice, and there was no shortage of David Cronenberg discussions during Splice, and so there's a kind of this extra Canadian feeling of a very visceral kind of horror that, I don't know, perhaps because it's cold up here, the mind turns on itself, or what it is, but we don't shy away from taking it that extra little edge. And I think things like Darknet and even Christmas horror probably would be harder to make in more mainstream entertainment industry.
No, it's funny you bring up Splice because we were talking about it just before just before we interviewed all of you, because we're huge fans. We absolutely love it. And the thing is, I was just talking the other day with someone, and they're like, "Can you describe to me Splice?" And it's so hard to kind of pin down the kind of essence of it, but to me it just comes to this kind of self-reflexivity that I think is maybe ingrained in Canadians because we're so trapped inside all the time. We turn on ourselves, exactly like you say, and that's why I think body horror and kind of this culture of gore is so predominant, because it's like you're deconstructing your body because you're tired of maybe going after the mind.
I think also Splice on its purest level is a story about a family.
Yeah.
It's about bringing up a child. And all the pitfalls, the most extreme pitfalls that can go with that. And I think that A Christmas Horror Story, and particularly Pascal's portion of that, really also ties in. I mean, Christmas in general is about family and where that can go wrong. And, I think at least 2 or 3 of the stories involve families, and let's say 2. The Changeling story and the Krampus story were very much about family dysfunction, and I guess it's the Canadian way to self-examine, and then add blood and chop heads off.
Examine it by ripping it apart, basically.
I also think that comedy and horror they go well together, and I think it's no secret that Canadians are really funny, and there's a real, I think the comedy out of this country is there's you can have a list of an endless list of great comedians that have come out of this country, but I think the horror and the comedy, I mean, I think there's a twisted humor to horror often, and I think that's probably more about if you're talking about the Canadianness. I find when I look at even David Cronenberg's films, who tend not to have there's not that much humor in it, but the comedy is very cerebral, right? It can be very cerebral. So I think there's a twisted grotesque. The grotesqueness is it kind of goes into that comedy word. So I think, and I think that's probably why comedy and horror are two things I think we might do well here.
I think also if you think of dramatic irony, which is you could also say a kind of cerebral comedy, is obvious in this film.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into why exactly, but you also have Black Christmas is not that funny of a film, but
Right.
it is darkly funny, the kind of dramatic irony of how they twist
Right.
and turn the kind of conventions of the genre.
Yeah. Black Christmas. I'm happy she brought that up,
Yeah.
because
It's a great scene with an icicle.
we can really make a connection to Christmas Horror Story from Black Christmas, because that's also a Canadian filmmaker, and Steve, the producer of this, did the remake.
Yeah.
And he was, I'm not going to speak for him, but he was always he wanted another kick at the can to do another horror Christmas horror movie, and he was really affected by the production of that. So it was interesting to see his fire, the passion he had to make this Christmas story was very, very strong, and it has a lot to do with Black Christmas, the first one, and the remake, and how it led into the motivation to make this. It was kind of interesting. Yeah.
It's funny. Black Christmas, the original, is one of my absolute favorite films, and I always mention it as maybe, for me, even though it's not specifically Canadian, right? You can watch it and not even realize that it's set in Canada.
Exactly.
That a lot of the actors are Canadian. That it's kind of a co-production, but it's a Canadian film, at least in me. But I say it's the most Canadian film of Canadian films, partially for what we've kind of touched on. You have the dark comedy aspect, you have the winter, and you have this unbearable sense of dread. And I'm not sure there exists a film in all of horror film history that captures it better than that film, especially in the final moments. And I kind of like that about your film as well. You kind of, in that last second, it's like that, there's the stab and then there's the twist, right? And Black Christmas has that, your film has that. They do feel so interconnected on, not that it's like an homage, but
It's a kind of a legacy, I guess.
Yeah,
You just
exactly.
sort of fall into that. We have our own heritage of gore, and it's impossible not if you watch horror films, if you're a horror film fan and you're Canadian, you're maybe going to be a little more attuned to the successes of someone like David Cronenberg, and gets influences too mild a word. It is actually how we think about horror.
Yeah, there is something actually inherently scary about Christmas. It's not that Christmas is without its sense of dread, and maybe that becomes more obvious as we get older and you kind of are removed, but even the culture around it, like...
Yeah, and I think Christmas, like, that's why I think we're scared of clowns, or scared of because Christmas is very geared towards children.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of adult things that happen during Christmas. So I think the horror element is, life, the terrible things in life don't stop, but during the holidays we sort of coat everything in candy, candy colors and these, and so it kind of gives it a false, there's a falseness to it at times, where there's this false cheerfulness, but there's people's problems don't go away, right? And I think that's why it's kind of, Santa Claus as a kind of, he's a jolly fellow, but you can, when you subvert that, like clowns or whatever childhood characters, it's always disturbing. And I think Christmas, that's why I think the gothicness of it is just great for.
And I think, Pascal, you referred, I think, earlier today about something about the holidays where, with the candy coating, where we bury our rage. Yeah. Whether that's rage about our family or rage about the overly crowded department stores, whatever it is, there's a lot of buried rage. And if you make a horror film about Christmas, you can just let that cat out of the bag.
Yeah. Big time.
So, just one more question. We asked this to everyone we interview. Do you have a message you would give to people who are aspiring filmmakers in any way? Like whether
yeah,
they're
we were just asked that in the last interview, but I'll just repeat what I said. Especially if you're if the audience is mostly from university students, I think one of the things is really to collaborate as much as you can and meet people and like-minded people and people that share your passion, because filmmaking can be it's very difficult, and it also, if you're a writer or the kind of person that when isolating yourself is probably the worst thing that you can do. The best thing that you can do as a filmmaker is meet other filmmakers, go to Fantasia, join a community of like-minded people who share your passion, because that love that everyone shares will really fuel you through the difficult times. If you when you're looking at the long game, you're going to have that energy. And I think not enough filmmakers find a mentor, for example. If you're a young filmmaker, find someone who has that experience and really pick their brain and try to learn as much as you can from them and find that community. And it doesn't sound like it's a lot, but it really will, because if we're talking, you might have an idea, I might have an idea. I've always wanted to make this kind of movie. Wow, me too. And that really is going to be the most fulfilling moments of your life as a filmmaker, is the stuff you do and you share with other people. So don't forget that. You're part of a community.
That's cool.
My advice to aspiring or on their way to being filmmakers in particular, whether it's writers or cinematographers, anybody in this very difficult business, is just expect a lot of the word no. You're going to confront a million no's in this business, because it's so easy to say no to anything.
Yeah.
It costs you one syllable and you don't have to do anything else. But just plow through all those no's and you'll get to a yes. And when that yes happens, you'll realize that you've found the right person to put your project forward or to work with, and then you can laugh at those no-sayers, naysayers.
That's fantastic. That's really awesome, guys. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm hoping that everyone, Canadian or otherwise, checks out the film. It's definitely worth their time. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of Fantasia, depending if you're going to be here because you're trapped in Montreal like the rest of us. But it's a blessing.
Voluntarily trapped.
It's a blessing. I agree with you. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a really nice day, guys.
Thanks.
We're sorry, the number you have dialed is not in service at this time.